I don't have a bad relationship with my mother-in-law. In fact, I think she treats me quite well, but there's something that's been on my mind. Thankfully, she doesn't pick on me at all. Before I talk about my mother-in-law, let me tell you a bit about myself. I met my husband at a barbecue I went to with some friends. We had a hobby in common and hit it off right away, and soon started dating. At that time, my husband was living in an apartment near his parents' home, and he bought the apartment after his mother suggested, "If you're going to buy an apartment near home, I'll help with the down payment." My husband was a bit dependent on his parents, and it had been his routine to go to his parents' house for meals every weekend since he was single. Being an only child, his mother is very fond of him and wanted to stay within a close distance. Although my husband is a bit homebound, he's kind and I have no complaints about him so far. For now, I don't think he's a mama's boy. We started living together in his apartment shortly after we started dating, as we worked close to each other and were already considering marriage. We began cohabitating to save up for our wedding and continued to live there after getting married. Even after we started living together, my husband kept his routine of going to his parents every weekend, so I also started having meals there with him since we were cohabitating. Staying over at his parents' house after dinner and spending the weekend there has become a routine. Even though we're a childless working couple, we want to save for the future, so I'm very grateful to be able to save on food expenses over the weekend. I don't dislike my mother-in-law. I think she's a very nice person. Certainly, it feels like neither my husband has detached from his parents nor his mother from her child, but when we go to his parents, my mother-in-law says, "You don't have to do anything, just relax as if you were at your own parents' house," so I admit I've become a bit dependent too. Honestly, I'm really happy that I don't have to do any housework even if it's just on the weekends. I appreciate being able to relax and be thankful for spending weekends at my in-laws, but there's just one thing that bothers me. After eating at my in-laws, I always end up with an upset stomach or vomiting. I wondered if it was just in my head, but it happens every time after eating, even when I'm otherwise feeling fine. I wonder why that is. I feel guilty because my mother-in-law goes to the trouble of cooking, and I haven't talked to my husband about it yet. She always serves meals with a smile and says, "I made it especially for you, so eat up," which makes it hard for me to refuse. But when I try to help with the meal preparation, she says, "I don't like someone else touching my kitchen." You don't need to help, just relax. Even when I try to carry the dishes to the kitchen after eating, she tells me, "I have my own way of doing things, don't touch it," and I can't help feeling like an outsider. There are times when I feel a barrier between my mother-in-law and me, but I seriously doubt she would do something to the food. My husband and father-in-law eat the same meals and they seem fine. Maybe it's just the week's fatigue showing up on the weekend, and I'm overthinking it. For now, I've decided to see a psychiatrist, thinking that the weekly stomach upsets might be due to stress. After explaining the situation to the doctor, I was prescribed medication. My husband hadn't known I was getting sick every weekend, but when he noticed me taking medicine, he asked what was going on, so I told him the truth. When I told him that I always feel sick after eating his mother's meals, he said, "I thought you were using the restroom more often on weekends, but I should have noticed sooner. You don't have to force yourself to go home for meals. Let's stop eating at my parents' from now on," and since then, we've stopped eating at my in-laws. I didn't feel the need to mention the stomach issues to my mother-in-law, so I just declined meals by saying I was busy with work or had other plans. Whether it's because I stopped eating her cooking or because of the medication from the psychiatrist, I no longer get sick. I was worried that talking to my husband about it would create a bad atmosphere, but I'm glad he understood. So far, I still think my mother-in-law is a good person, and I hope it's not true that she's been adding something to the food. I don't go to my in-laws anymore, but my husband still does occasionally. It was his habit since he was single, and it seems hard for him to stop completely. So far, he hasn't come back feeling unwell. It feels a bit awkward that only my husband goes to his parents without me, but it seems my mother-in-law doesn't mind too much. Recently, "Why doesn't Kate come with you?" she sometimes asks, but he just brushes it off. We're not pressured to come together, which is a relief. And so, I hadn't been eating at my in-laws for a while, but there came a time when I absolutely had to. My mother-in-law contacted us because she wanted to have a meal to celebrate the upcoming birthdays of my father-in-law and husband. My husband has been celebrating his birthday with his father at their home since he was single, and I have been participating ever since we started cohabitating. This year, my mother-in-law wanted to hold the meal as usual. I was hesitant to go to the in-laws at first, but I couldn't refuse, thinking it would be rude to my father-in-law. My husband suggested, "Let's just go for the greetings and to give the gifts, then leave right away. We can think of some excuse not to eat." So, we informed them that we would come for the celebration but would refrain from having the meal. If my mother-in-law insisted on having a meal, we decided we would suggest going out to eat. We bought a gift for my father-in-law and planned to head back right after giving it to him. Upon arriving at the in-laws, my mother-in-law was busy preparing the meal in the kitchen, which gave me an uneasy feeling. While we were conveying our birthday wishes and handing over the gift to my father-in-law, my mother-in-law, smiling, laid out the food on the table and said, "Since you've come all this way, why not join us for a meal?" My husband tried to refuse, reminding her, "We said we weren't going to eat." But my mother-in-law was insistent, "I've already made it, and Kate hasn't been over in so long, so why not just for today?" I also tried to decline, saying I had another appointment afterward or that I had already made a reservation at a restaurant. My mother-in-law became angry. "It's rude to refuse a meal at a celebration. I've spent so much time preparing this, and you're not planning to eat?" We tried to calm her down, but it didn't work, and not wanting to ruin the birthday atmosphere, we reluctantly agreed to have a little bit of the meal. I honestly didn't want to eat at the in-laws. My husband said, "Don't force yourself. Just eat a little of what you can and we'll leave." But inside, I was scared of getting sick again. As we were about to sit down at the table, we heard the sound of a chair falling over and something heavy hitting the ground. Shocked, we looked over to see my father-in-law collapsed. Rushing to him, we found he had lost consciousness, his eyelids and lips swollen red, breathing with great difficulty. He was barely breathing. In the midst of the panic, my mother-in-law shouted at me to call an ambulance, which I did promptly. The paramedics asked about the situation at the time he collapsed, and while I explained, it became clear that while we were arguing about whether to eat together, my father-in-law had begun eating the food laid out on the table. He was fine when we gave him the gift, so it seemed his condition deteriorated after eating my mother-in-law's cooking. She accompanied my father-in-law in the ambulance to the hospital. When we followed to the hospital, the doctor was asking my mother-in-law in detail about what happened. She seemed a bit flustered when she saw us arrive, but I thought it was just because of the situation. When we told the doctor that my father-in-law suddenly collapsed during the meal, we were asked if he had eaten anything that could cause illness, and if there was anything we could think of. "He has a shellfish allergy," my mother-in-law explained, to our surprise. I also have a shellfish allergy. But knowing there were 2 people with shellfish allergies, she wouldn't have used shellfish in her cooking. My father-in-law has a severe shellfish allergy, so she should have been even more careful with the meals. However, the doctor said my father-in-law was suffering from anaphylactic shock due to a shellfish allergy. When asked how much shellfish he had consumed, my mother-in-law replied in a fading voice, "I think he only ate a little of the shrimp I crushed." Hearing this, my husband became angry. "What do you mean? You know both Kate and Dad have allergies. Why did you use shrimp?" "It was actually prepared for Kate to eat," she said. It seemed my mother-in-law, knowing I had a shellfish allergy, was trying to get me to eat a dish containing shrimp. She wouldn't let me help with meal preparation, perhaps to hide the fact that she was using shrimp in the cooking. At the in-laws, the meal is usually served after everyone sits down, but this time, the food was laid out on the table before we sat down, perhaps thinking we wouldn't be able to refuse once it was there. My father-in-law seems to have mistakenly eaten the dish that was meant for me. "Why would you try to make someone with an allergy eat such a thing?" my husband demanded. "I heard Kate only had a mild allergy, so I thought it would be okay," she replied. Hearing my mother-in-law's words, I was truly upset. Just because it's mild doesn't mean it's okay to eat. If my father-in-law has an allergy, you should understand how dangerous allergies can be, right? You said that Kate always gets sick after eating your cooking, but you weren't doing this from the start, were you? It was just a little bit. A little bit shouldn't be life-threatening, and look, Kate is fine right now, isn't she? Apparently, ever since I started eating at the in-laws, my mother-in-law had been secretly adding crushed shrimp to only my meals every time. I was really shocked because I thought she was not the kind of person to do such a thing, but now I understand why I was getting sick after every meal at the in-laws. My allergy was mild, so I only ended up with an upset stomach and vomiting, but my father-in-law had a severe allergy, which caused his airways to swell and led to difficulty breathing, and at one point he was critically unconscious. Don't joke around. What are you doing? Dad's life could have been in danger because of you. And Kate, it was just by chance that nothing serious happened to her. Don't be so angry. I was just lonely since you got married. It was just a whim. Forgive me. A whim? Don't mess around. My husband was angrier than I'd ever seen him. My mother-in-law tried to calm him down as if what she did was an exaggeration. What's going on? Why are you yelling like that? My father-in-law, perhaps awakened by the loud argument, opened his eyes. It seemed like the medication had taken effect, and he had recovered enough to talk. He didn't understand what had happened and asked us to explain, so my husband and I told him about everything my mother-in-law had done and how my father-in-law had accidentally eaten the food that was meant for me. All the while, my mother-in-law sat in the corner of the room, looking very uncomfortable. My father-in-law listened intently to our story, and by the time we finished, he was shaking with anger. What have you done? Is this story true? I was just a little jealous of Kate. I never thought it would turn out like this. Please forgive me. There's no way I can forgive you. Being a little jealous or bullying your daughter-in-law isn't the issue here. People die from allergies. Don't be so dramatic. Look, both of you are fine, aren't you? What's fine about this? I will never forgive you. As one would expect, my father-in-law was furious when he learned what my mother-in-law had done. She was severely reprimanded by both my husband and my father-in-law. My mother-in-law kept making unclear excuses like I never thought you would eat it by mistake. After that, my father-in-law stayed in the hospital until the swelling in his airway subsided. My husband and I visited him between work and on our days off to take care of him. When my mother-in-law came to the hospital, my father-in-law said, "I can't trust you, you might do something again," and refused to let her into the room. She desperately apologized, but even after he was discharged, my father-in-law's anger didn't subside, and eventually, he divorced her and kicked her out of the house. She apologized until the end, but she had completely lost his trust, and it turned into a major ordeal. Of course, she also apologized to me and said she didn't want to divorce him and asked me to help persuade him. I understood why she was apologizing, but I thought it was too much to ask to persuade my father-in-law not to divorce, so I ignored her. I couldn't forgive what my mother-in-law had done, and I completely understood my father-in-law's feelings. She cried and pleaded with us many times, but I think it was a natural consequence. In the end, my father-in-law hired a lawyer and divorced her. After the divorce, I no longer needed to see a psychiatrist, and my husband and I have been living a peaceful life. After things settled down with my mother-in-law, I became pregnant with a new life. I plan to retire from work and enjoy the time with my husband until our child is born. My father-in-law is very happy about the child and is looking forward to it. Since it must be hard for a man to do all the housework alone, we regularly help him with household chores and have meals together. My mother-in-law, who had always been a homemaker, apparently struggled to find work. I heard through the grapevine that she's making ends meet by working as a cashier at a supermarket. When they divorced, my father-in-law demanded a large amount of alimony, and she's been working hard to pay for her living expenses and the alimony. Her misdeeds seem to have reached her friends as well, and she appears to be getting a cold shoulder from them. My father-in-law demanded more alimony than usual and has been using that money to take us out to eat and buy baby supplies. My mother-in-law has no room for luxuries and is living a tight life in a cheap apartment. After what happened, I have no intention of ever letting my mother-in-law meet our child. I never thought things would turn out this way. It was tough for a while, but now I want to live a happy life with my husband and our new baby.